My name is Joshua Gibson, and you are listening to the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast, a show dedicated to promoting a message of critical thinking as it pertains to strength training, nutrition, and well-being. This is done through interviews with experts, high-level athletes, coaches, and people heavily involved in strength sports and athletic development. Pull up a chair, grab a coffee, and let's get on to today's podcast. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Gibson, and I'm joined today by someone who is, I would consider a titan in the field. If we want to talk about sports science and strength and conditioning and those areas is kind of being amalgamated into one, and that's Meg Stone. And I think, one of the really exciting things about this conversation is that, one, I'll get to learn a lot about Meg, but everyone else will as well. And I think provide some color to, the name that we'll see all around and hear about. So Meg, how are you doing this morning?
Doing pretty well. Yeah, I'm fighting fit and ready to go. We've got a lot going on at the moment with interns out in the field and keeping in touch with them and making sure they're doing what they need to do. So, yep, and then just preparing for the fall. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe I know people will have context from, seeing your name maybe on websites or books, articles, all those things. But
I'm changing the venue behind me because that light looks like it's going through my head. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. For people who aren't familiar with what you're currently up to, maybe you can kind of give us an up-to-speed version of where you're at, what you're doing, what your day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month looks like, so people have some context.
Well, as you know, I'm the director of our Centre of Excellence for Sports Science and Coach Education. Really, the centre came about really through this drive that Dr. Stone, my husband, had for getting back into the true sports science. We had been at the Olympic training site in 2005. And we both wanted to get back into an academic setting, me in coaches education and he in sports science. So we developed this Centre of Excellence, which was really suggested to us from our previous president at ETSU. And so what the centre does is a backup and a support unit for our graduate program, the graduate program in Masters in Sports Science, and then in our PhD doctoral students in Sports Science. The Sports Science program here is in two directions. One is performance and the other side is research. There's a lot of crossover, so students can do both. They get a research side and they get a performance side. And so they can go in either direction. When they graduate from here, they can go into a teaching role or they can go into a coaching role. And some have got a bit of both going on. They've got classes, but they also coach. So really our centre is a support unit for that. What does that support entail? I teach a class called Management Skills for Coaching. I'm also the supervisor of all our interns. Our interns need to do a 6-unit internship, which covers 240 hours. And they're out in the field at the moment. I have 3 interns who are with baseball, one in Kingsport, one up in Elizabethton, and then there's another who is in Wyoming with a baseball minor league, all minor league. They're doing the analytics, they're doing coaching work actually on the coalface, working with these professional and semi-professional groups. We also have another intern who's down at South Carolina with predominantly football. They've got 110 players there. Of course, they've got a lot of money and they can support 110 players. And so they're there through the summer. I have another one that's out in Arizona who's at Mesa College working with a good friend of mine called Rich Winner. And I think if you're a powerlifter, you'll know the name Rich Winner. So, yeah, it's just supervising them at the moment. During the semester time, really, it's picking up a lot of the loose pieces because as you come into our program, every single student who comes in with its master's or PhD, they're assigned a sport. And within a week, it's a panic because they've got to come up with an annual plan that we approve, and Dr. Stone approves, or Dr. Duca, who's our performance manager. They look at the plan and give the okay to implement that annual plan with whatever sport they're assigned to. And then I've got to follow up on that, making sure that the coach of the team and the strength coach are on the same page and those kind of things. So roughly, that's where what I do daily. And it's, to be honest with you, it's been a pure pleasure over the last 10, 15 years to work with some of these dedicated, passionate and committed young men who come back to our program, either having been strength coaches and want to advance themselves, or they're just beginning in the field as far as getting their masters. So we're very, very fortunate. We've had some great people go through this program.
The mission of Weightlifting House is to bring the sport of weightlifting closer to the coaches, fans, and athletes. They're able to do this by supporting the Philosophical Weightlifting podcast. You can use the code PHILWL, that's PHILWL, at the USA Weightlifting House store. That will save you 10% off all products, including bars, straps, wraps, singlets, and anything else you could imagine. That is PHILWL, PHILWL, to save 10% off everything at the Weightlifting House store. And by supporting the podcast, you support Weightlifting House. Yeah, and I think maybe I take for granted how much I know about the program and how much I know about you and what you all do, which it sounds very comprehensive. I mean, having kind of both components, the research and then the coaching and kind of performance tracks, I think allows people to be well-rounded. So when they finish, they can go either way. So the work you do is critical to that. For you, where did that interest develop? Like if we go as far back as we can, where did the interest in sport and performance start to develop?
Well, I think like everybody else, like most people, it's in high school or junior high. But I've always been really interested in just doing what I can do physically. Right back till 7, 8 years old when I was ice skating. I was going to be the next Sonia Henney. That's what I was going to do. And I discovered that, hey, maybe this isn't quite where I want to go. And of course, when I went into high school in Great Britain at that time, in the 60s, women didn't play soccer. Women either did field hockey, netball, a little bit of basketball, but not an awful lot. So, I was into hockey, I was into swimming, I was into a bit of everything. So through that, I ended up going to physical education college, as they had at that time, and became a physical education teacher. And I taught for probably 7 years in high school. During that time, I developed this interest in throwing. And, obviously I was very, very fortunate that I went to a physical education school, and about my second or third year there, I was running first leg of the relay, and somebody said to me, we need somebody to go throw the discus. And of course I'm there. Points for the team. Let's go. So I threw the discus, and the first time I threw it was 114 feet. And from what I can gather, that's a pretty good first time effort. And I was fortunate, the head track and field coach for Scotland was at the meet and invited me to a selected athletes course. So I said, okay, I'll go. And not that, excuse me, not that I was so great. I think the situation was that throwing in Scotland wasn't very good. So I ended up winning the Scottish Championships after competing for about 6 months. And I got encouraged by the coach to continue and really take this interest on throwing discus to as much as I possibly could to a limit. Excuse me, I'm going to drink.
Yeah, and kind of having that like abbreviated intro to athletics and throwing.
And of
Uh,
course, throwing. Hey, you can't throw far unless you're strong. And so they developed the interest in weightlifting and resistance training.
mhm. Did you did you have, obviously people interested in getting their kids into different sports and playing different sports and being physically active? That's one thing. But did you come up from a background that was, steeped in athletics besides just being interested from the start and trying out a bunch of different sports?
Well, my father was he was a big golfer. And my mother was very athletic in school. She ran and really had a strong interest. So really, the whole family. My brother was a very good football player. Um, he did sign some sort of forum with a professional team and didn't like it very much and ended up going to university as an architect. But yeah, the whole family was very sports orientated. I think from being interested in throwing, I don't know if a lot of people, maybe you have experienced this too, Josh, where you really like the feel of being powerful. And I used to really enjoy that feel in throwing, where I could put every effort into this one explosion to throw far. And I enjoyed being strong. Still do. I'm not hugely into weightlifting at the moment, but I do train on a regular basis and enjoy it. So I guess it's been a lifelong pursuit.
Mm,
And competing in two Olympics has really helped my career because it gives you a credibility that if you can always say the word I'm an Olympian.
mm.
People recognize that as being authentic in your passion.
Yeah, and I guess we got a little far ahead. So when you started throwing and you had this maybe inclination for it, um, what was your trajectory from that point of like trying it out and getting into it to making it to the Olympic Games? How did that process unfold itself?
I think it's interesting because my husband and I just talked about this the other day there. When I was in Great Britain, I enjoyed my time throwing in Great Britain. And then there came to a time, I can give you the exact date, 1978. We're going back a little bit. 1978, I had a really bad year. I had some personal issues with our coach, and so we lost our coach.
Mm,
Um, and then the 2 years, but 1978 was a bad. I competed in the Commonwealth Games in Edmonton, had a terrible meet, and I thought, I am going nowhere, absolutely nowhere. I need to change something. Well, that year, I was approached at the beginning of '79. I was approached by Chris Murray,
mm,
who was the head track coach at Iowa, and he said, "Would you be interested in a scholarship to the US?" And I'm like, "Iowa?" He said, "I'm moving to Arizona
mm,
this summer." And I thought, Arizona, you can fry eggs on the sidewalk there. I can throw all year round. So I decided, yes, I'm going to move to Arizona. So that's when January 9th, 1980, I moved to Tucson, Arizona, and my whole world changed.
mm.
I had gone from, if you ever live in Great Britain, there's nothing but negativity, and people thrive on negativity. I do not. I really thrive in a very positive, supportive atmosphere. And so I found that in Tucson. And so, with nothing different, nothing changed at all in as far as my training program, but I ended up breaking the British record and the NCAA record 5 times
Wow.
in 3 months when I moved to Tucson, which tells you a whole different approach, whole different mindset.
Mm.
I remember my first competition out in Tucson, I was terrible. I remember banging doors and going into my apartment thinking, I didn't travel 8,000 miles to compete like a wally. And, I had bad competition. And then from there, I just took off. The coach said to me at that time, very good guy called Bob Myers, coaching high jump at Arizona presently. He said to me, "What's the matter with you?" I don't know, I didn't come to feet. He said, "Meg, you've got another competition coming up next week. What the heck are you getting all uptight for?" And I'm thinking, you're right. What
Mm.
am I getting all uptight for? The next competition was in Las Vegas, and I broke the British and Commonwealth record there, and got the NCAA record. So it was just really a whole positive atmosphere that I found in Tucson. And that took me off. And then, of course, I got selected for Moscow Commonwealth Games, and I was the only Western thrower in the final. Everybody else was from Bulgaria, Romania, Russia, whatever. And then the 4 years I spent throwing are some of the happiest memories that I have. Ended up throwing in Los Angeles. Didn't make a medal. I was about 3 or 4 inches off a medal, but still enjoyed the experience. And from there, it's interesting. That was 1984, and I was just talking to my husband, like I say, a couple of weeks ago. Um, July 1st this year will mark the 40th anniversary of me signing my contract as the head strength and conditioning coach at the University of Arizona.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's been a while. I was approached by the head football coach in April before the LA Olympics. Would I be interested? He had he said, what was it, 17 or 18? He said football players had said, "Hey, well, you're looking for a new strength coach. What about Meg?" And I was supported by some of the players because I lifted in the same weight room as they did. And that's when I took off into strength and conditioning. Up until that point, I was all ready to become a head track coach someplace, sometime. But, happenstance, fortunate that you get an opportunity here and you shoot off at a different direction. And really, I've thoroughly enjoyed being part of this whole, I don't know what you call it, profession, because at that time it probably wasn't looked on much of a profession, but now it is. Very fortunate that I met some great people who supported me. Dr. Stone, obviously, but people like Cedric Dempsey, who went on to become the executive director of the NCAA. He hired me. Larry Smith, the head football coach, he was the one that approached me about doing it. So a lot of male mentors. Unfortunately, very few women mentors, but mostly men.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of ways I want to take the conversation. I think the first part, I guess, that would be really interesting for me to hear about, and it's what I mentioned when we kind of got connected from Conch, who set us up, is what was it like coming up in athletics and then getting into coaching as especially females or women in strength and conditioning coaching now. It's still not even necessarily. Still much more men within the profession. What was it like being in athletics, particularly something that's strength and power focused, and then getting into strength and conditioning in the 70s and 80s?
It's a different world now than it was then. I remember going to my very first NSCA conference, and I think there was 4 women there. And I remember the support that I felt from some and the lack of support that I felt from others. So it was a mixed bag. But you've got to have a self confidence and a self belief in what you're trying to accomplish. And I knew I could do the job because I was heavily involved in coaches' education in Great Britain before I left. I had taught for 7 years. So I had a teaching background, which I think is very important if you're going to coach. And then I was very fortunate that my coach from Great Britain was head of coaches' education in
Mm.
Great Britain for track and field. And when I first started to work with track and field, with football, I thought, okay, I've got some sprinters on the wing and back there as DBs. I've got some linemen, shot put discus throwers, and I've got a javelin thrower behind them. And I've got some decathletes in the linebacker line. So a lot of the programs that I did, I individualised depending on your position. And then watching film became very important to see what does a linebacker do? What does a wide receiver do? The defensive back, what is he being asked to do? And just learning how you would approach that particular sport, because it was football initially I was hired for. But then I had a really strong thought about every sport deserves good strength and conditioning. And so from there, I managed to hire a lot of good people that, that were my assistants and went on to have really good jobs themselves. Um, So I think, as far as the women are concerned, very few initially when I first started, but the area has just grown, and like everything in the last 40 years, there's been quite a marked move in the strength and conditioning world to hire women as assistants or Olympic sports that they may have a speciality or an interest in. Very few women have become head strength and conditioning coaches for football. Still, it's still an area. I can think of three people who have done that back then. One was Beth Stringham, who was the second person to be hired as a head strength coach with Rice way back in the day, and then Brandon, who was Brandon Lee, who was with the Jets for a short period of time. Anyway, back then, very few women. And it's really interesting as you go through your career and you start to establish yourself, and a lot of the men in the area see that you have a commitment and that you do know what you're doing. But it takes about 4 or 5 years for that to get established in those days. I used to have pro scouts come into my office, and they're like, "Excuse me, dear, can you find the head coach for me?" "I'm the head coach." No, the guy that works with football." "No, I'm the guy that works with football." So it took them a little bit of time to get used to working with a woman. And then after about 4 or 5 years, they'd come looking for me, because I used to tell the players, "You don't come in the weight room, you don't do what you're asked. I'm going to tell the pro scout that. I'm not going to I'm not going to waffle for you. I'm not going to have my reputation on the line because you want to get into the pros, or you want me to give you a good rapport to this guy. You want." So I used to tell them straight, "Hey, this guy's a great, good player, great on the line. Can't get him in the weight room. You'll not develop him." And I would tell them that if that was the case. But very few times did I have to do that, because we were very fortunate in those days that we had a very, very good football team. The last actually game that I was on the sideline with them for the Fiesta Bowl, where we beat Miami 29-0. First time there was a shutout in Miami in a bowl game. So we had and you've probably heard the Desert Swarm defense, which was during the time I was at Arizona. So very, very fortunate to be there. When getting back to the female thing, I was at a conference one time when Johnny Parker, who people will know, was the strength coach at New England for a long period of time, but had been at several NFL. He was on a panel with me, and somebody said, "What was it like, Meg, being a head strength and conditioning coach and being a female?" And before I could say anything, Johnny Parker piped up and he said, "Meg Stone was never a female strength coach." And I thought, what? He said she was a female. She was a coach who just happened to be a female. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Uh, you know, let's get the coach thing first, and then think about, oh, maybe she's a female. So it's coaching that's important, not your gender or whatever. It's more being a coach and knowing what you're doing as a coach. And I was very fortunate again when John Stuckey, his wife, came up to me at a conference at the CSCCA banquet where they were giving out this legend in the field thing. And she said to me, and John had passed away at that time. He was the head strength coach at UT, Tennessee, when they won the national championship. And she said, "John Stuckey said that you were the real deal." And I thought, I'll never forget that. What a compliment. So it's not really whether you're a female or a male. It's whether you can relate to the players and whether you know and they know that you know what you're doing and that you can sell your passion to them and get to know the players. I mean, right now I'm on Facebook with an awful lot of the players that were playing back in late 80s, early 90s. You know, I see a lot of them in their kids are now, John Fina's kid is now playing for Arizona. And, you're seeing a lot of these young men that you worked with. And it's just a question of committing yourself to the field. And I see an awful lot of women now, getting assistant coach of the year, and there's a lot of accolades going towards women now, and it's encouraging to see that women are being accepted into the field. I'd still like to see a head strength and conditioning coach for football, and that's primarily what they do. We've still to get there.
Hey, what's up, weightlifters? Danny here, founder of Onyx Weightlifting Co., a leather accessories company specializing in weightlifting gear. In our shop, we make gear that doesn't get in the way of your performance because we understand that hitting lifts requires your full attention. Our straps, wrist wraps, and belts are designed to be comfortable and reliable, so all you need to do is make lifts. Thanks for listening to our friend Josh's podcast. You can continue to support him by visiting our online shop at onyxstraps.com and using his code PHILWL. That's PHILWL at checkout. See you on the platform.
Yeah. And from your experience, obviously you just showed up, you were a great athlete, you got an opportunity, you were a great coach, and that kind of like opened the door to all the opportunities. How would it be more, I guess, what's the way of getting more competent coaches who are female into head strength coach roles? Is it advocating? Is it just showing up, doing good work, and hoping that the opportunity strikes? Like, what do you think is the path forward?
I think there's several, and I've thought about this a lot recently because I'm in the middle of doing my own research for my doctoral work and it's women in coaching that I'm looking at. I think there's several things. Number one is having the right personality for it, being confident, being self-assured, and being able to establish relationships with men. Because that's, let's face it, sports a masculine type of approach that you need. I mean, you need to be hard-driven, you need to be confident in what you're doing, you need to be passionate about it, and you need to show people that you have those elements. You also have to relate to men. You have to be able to find a way to build the relationship that you need to build if you're going to work with a coaching staff who are used to predominantly men, working with men. So the personality thing, I think, is very important. The other thing I think that's important is that you are able to demonstrate the knowledge that you've got to have in order to be able to get across that knowledge to the players you're working with. And I think a lot of that came right down to the background I had, being able to lift and show that you can lift. And I think that's what got me the job. I joke with people that I got the job because I had a 550-pound squat.
Holy cow.
And I had a 350 clean.
Wow.
I had a bench press at 335. So those are the kind of things that when you demonstrate that you know how to put a program together, and a successful one, yeah, people are going to pay attention. And then the other thing I think is being able to back it up with the knowledge of how to get there. I think being able to say to a player, back off. I can remember saying that to one of our defensive linemen, drop the weight. You can squat 750, great, but you're not going to go out and play on Saturday having squatted 750. You got to back off and just being able to let them know that you're making decisions in the training program for their best interests. There's several examples of players that I worked with that I've had to really put the strong arm on it to stop them being over the top lifting, which is a good way to be, great way to be, because in that team that I worked with at Arizona, there was just an expectations, and I think I laid down the expectations that don't walk in the door here and treat this like you're going clubbing. You're in here to work. And that if you don't want to work, there's a door. Simple as that. Don't come. And I really had a lot of support from the head coach, both head coaches, both Coach Smith and Coach Tomey that I worked for.
Yeah, so it sounds like, as with any head coach role, it's not just one thing. It's going to be a lot of things that have to coalesce. It's going to have to be competence and being able to demonstrate that, being able to communicate with coaches and with athletes, being able to be effective in what you do, and demonstrate that and do that along with having the people in place who can connect you and put you into the right spots. That would kind of be what ultimately is going to get people into those roles who are deserving of them.
And I think there's another thing that you need to consider too when we think of the lack of females. A lot of women just don't want to coach football, and that's fine. That's fine. I mean, they don't want to put themselves into that awkward position where you have to sell yourself. That's fair enough. That's not a criticism. It just is.
Yeah. So what you mentioned your current research that you're doing to get your doctorate. Maybe you can talk about that. What are some themes? What are some kind of major things that you've picked up that have informed you about this area of or the study of females in coaching?
Well, I think I'm going to get very controversial now, Josh. If you read extensively in the research about women in sport, you read a lot about barriers for women. Men don't like women in this role, or you're finding there's a double standard. Women get treated differently from men, and just a whole lot of barriers, and how you would try to overcome those barriers and cope. Well, here's the deal. How do you overcome that? Well, politically, recently, the whole way of overcoming that is DEI, diversity, inclusion, equity. A lot about that in the literature. Let's think about that for a minute. Is sport an equity type of environment to work in? Sport's based on a couple of things: excellence and meritocracy. You've got to be good in order to succeed. Isn't that the same for coaching? And so this idea of you've got to have a quota of women in this role or that role, that quota might not attract meritocracy. or excellence. And in actual fact, I was talking to a woman who's involved, I won't say who or what because I'm not wanting to drop anybody in it, but she's involved in a professional sport. And she said that there was a lot of women being encouraged to get involved in that professional sport. They're lasting a year because they don't have the background or the education or the personality to make it work. And isn't that sad? You get a quota. For example, the NFL now, if they are looking for somebody to go on their board, one of the people that they interview's got to be a woman. I mean, okay, and I think there's only one female that's working at the NFL in a decision-making position. So it's a really difficult question to answer, Josh, because if you look at, I have looked at over 30 websites that are directed specifically only at women networking. Women get things like We Coach and the Female Coaches Network, and there's UNESCO. There's over 30 of them out there. Is it working to have women just talk to women? Not really, because if you look at the stats of elite women coaches, I believe in Rio it was 11%. In Tokyo, I think it went to 13% women. And then in some of these websites I've been reading about, we'll get 50% women by Paris. You're not going to jump from 13% to 50%. We'll be lucky if we get 15 to 20% women coaching. So it's a difficult area and it's a struggling area. If you look at people like Nicole Lavoie, who is the head up of the Tucker Centre up in Minnesota, specifically looking at women. She's done a lot of research, a lot of background work on that, on women in sport. It's a difficult problem to get up there that we're never going to reach a 50%, in my opinion. There's just so many difficult issues and problems. If I had to sum up my thesis, have you heard of the phrase cognitive resonance? That's where I am. I'm struggling, because I'm seeing one thing and so I'm still trying to, as I reach my third study and my 5-study dissertation, I'm still struggling with it, to know how do you resolve this issue. Are you ever going to reach a 50%? I don't think so.
Yeah, and
so, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I think research can be descriptive. It can explain the lay of the land. It can tell us what's going on, and maybe we can speculate why. And then it can also be like interventional. It can try to affect the field of study, or it can try to create some change. So from your own personal opinion, kind of understanding the literature and maybe your perspective of what's going on, what do you feel like your role is in impacting that area?
I think just being able to do podcasts like this and get word out that, hey, there is a role for women in sport, and I think we don't do that enough. And in fact, we're trying to do that in our centre at the moment, get more podcasts, and actually we're struggling with it. How do we get more women, not just in strength and conditioning, but sports science? Very few women that are actually on the coalface in sports science. We're looking at maybe doing a grant to try and investigate how do we encourage more women to get involved, if you could call it STEM, I don't know, but in that whole area that has been predominantly thought of as male orientated. How do you get more women involved? And I think that's something that a lot of people are struggling with. As I read the research that's out there for this dissertation, lots of people are coming up with things, but mainly they come up. The research comes up as you said, very descriptive. Statistics, that's great, but how do we solve these issues? And it's very, very difficult. I think just promoting women as much as we can, not just saying, oh, isn't it awful, we've got a double standard. Yeah, we know there's issues out there, but how do we promote the whole area for women? How do we attract women into coaching? That's more what my interest lies in. How do we actually do that? And I'll be honest with you, Josh, I haven't been able to figure out podcasts getting the word out somehow that there is an avenue for people who are interested. When I interviewed a young lady from Great Britain who has been a very, very successful coach at Olympic level, she said, oh, here we go, banging the drum about women again. And that's the approach that you get, and there's not enough women. Yeah, we know, but how do we make an effect? I'm still struggling with that. Get the word out.
Express the passion that defines you. At Virus, we understand that when it comes to performance, the slightest edge can mean the difference between winning and losing. Each product is designed and tested with performance in mind. This principle inspired the technology that is infused into our apparel. Built with the intention to move with you and work for you, we create tools meant to help express the passion that defines you. The future of technology-driven apparel. Improve performance, prevent fatigue, recover faster, and go further. Virus is a proud sponsor of Josh Gibson and the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. Use code PHILWL for 10% off at checkout. That's PHILWL, PHILWL for 10% off.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. And I think your own personal experience kind of resonates, which is someone saw the competence and gave you an opportunity. And I think, from my standpoint with the podcast, I've always been interested in getting a co-host who would be a female, but also happens to be a female, but is like really competent, can contribute, can be an active part of it. It's just being aware of that difference. It's not like doing it, as you mentioned, for like a token hire or token person, but it's more so because there's competence and it brings in some different frame of reference, so we can increase the size of the amount of people in the space in sport. So if we think about, and I think people who might say like, well, women don't belong in coaching or in sport, and the reason you get them involved is because they bring a different level of competence and expertise and impact. It's not just because they're, people are different or have their personal differences, but it's because they offer more.
Yeah.
So I think it's bringing that awareness and being able to advocate, but also create some sort of action plan which is how to get people involved.
Well, I think people do talk about the nurture side of women, being nurturing and being able to be sympathetic, and the other side is the masculine side, which is aggressive and hard-nosed coaching, and you can get both in a female coach, but I think if we look at the NCAA movement at the moment on mental health, etc., maybe more women need to get involved in coaching because of that. There's been some real serious issues in the NCAA with this since COVID, especially with this mental health and their drive towards being more supportive of athletes' mental being. There's a place for more women being involved. How do you say to some of these football coaches, be a little more gentle? Is that what you want? So I don't know. I think a healthy combination of both aggressive coaching but sympathetic to allowing that athlete to know, hey, I care about you. it was very interesting when I worked at Texas Tech. We had a quarterback coach who I always used to watch, and he would ream these kids out during football practice. But every time that he left the field, you'd see him with his arm round the quarterback and he's talking to him. And, so hard nosed, but with that side of, I understand what you're going through, I'm with you, I'm going to be here for you type coaching. It's interesting, the personality dynamics that you need in order to be able to support that team and the individuals within it.
Yeah, which is why I think like qualitative research or just coaches who have written memoirs or written books are super helpful, because I think coaches do learn, or athletes do learn what coaching is through the modeling of that. Mm-hmm. So seeing people who can capture both elements. So I'm a strength coach at a high school in Morgantown, and the head football coach, Eric Snyder, he's I think kind of the epitome of that. He cares about the kids more than anyone I know. He's also incredibly helpful and resourceful and wants to make it the best program he can. And he's a great coach. He's really invested on the football side. And I think seeing that as the model is a way to kind of bridge both elements, instead of just thinking, and I'm not throwing any shade, but when you think of, Bob Knight, you might think of throwing chairs across basketball courts. And if that's the model, it's like, well, you just be hard nosed and aggressive. And maybe that's not the complete story. I would like for you to talk maybe a little bit more about your coaching background, because you mentioned Texas Tech and you mentioned Arizona and you mentioned, being an Olympian. You mentioned all these accolades and places you've been and coached. What's your kind of like storyline been since Arizona? So from there, you were the head strength coach for football. What was it like kind of after that?
Well, when I was at Arizona, I was there for 9 years as the head strength coach, actually almost 10. And I just, at that point, had met Dr. Stone. But, you fall in love and, oh my goodness, everything changes. Anyway, I was at a point where I have not experienced anything else but Arizona. I had been an athlete there. I had moved straight from being the athlete right into the head coaching position. And, I thought, I don't know anything about outside of Tucson. And Bob Bockrath, who was the associate AD at Arizona, and Cedric Dempsey, that same year, Cedric went on to become the executive director of the NCAA. Bob Bockrath left and went to Texas Tech. And what happened was I got a phone call. He said, Meg, I'm looking for a head strength coach. Do you know anybody that might be interested? And I thought, you know what, Bob, I might be interested. And he said, you? I said, yeah. He said, I never thought you'd ever leave Arizona. I said, well, I'm ready to look at something different. So, I said, but you know what? You're not getting me as cheap as you got me the last time. And he asked me what I would want for a salary, and I gave him a figure. And 2 days later, he called me back and he said, I've got it. I said, well, I'm coming. So I ended up at Texas Tech. And then from Texas Tech, again, as I say, I fell in love. What the heck? Well, was Dr. Stone going to leave his lab at Appalachian and come to Texas Tech? Or was I going to go up to Appalachian State? And I thought, what am I going to do? And I tell my kids this, that we work with here. When I left Texas Tech, I was earning about 65 plus a bowl game bonus because we went to the Cotton Bowl that year. So I was in the 70 range for a single woman at that time. Not bad salary. I got offered a $4,000 consultancy fee at Appalachian State to move up to help out with track. I moved up there because I felt like Dr. Stone had established his lab at App, and I didn't want to destroy his career, and it was easier for me to move. So I got for 4,000. 2 weeks later, the track coach left, and I was offered the assistant head track coaching position. And so I was back up earning a full-time salary, full-time job. I think if you guard your reputation and you have a good one, you'll get those opportunities. And so that's what I tell our students here. Don't mess around. Don't do anything that's going to hurt your reputation. Guard it like your life, because you never know when you're going to need it, that good reputation. And you will, oh, no, she works hard, or she's dependable, or she knows what she's doing type thing. Boom, the opportunity comes up. So from Appalachian, I was sitting at my office one day, and I got a phone call from Scotland where the national coach position is open for track and field. Are you interested? Well, when your home country talks to you about getting back there to do national coaching position, I thought, why not? Why not just jump? Dr. Stone was very supportive. He said, go. And he said, I'll come over there in about 6 months. So he took a leave of absence and came over. And when he came over, talk about a good reputation, he was offered the chair of sport at Edinburgh University. So I was the national track and field coach, and he was the head of sport at Edinburgh. We took a group of athletes to the Olympic Training Centre in San Diego, a Scottish group. Some weightlifters that Dr. Stone was coaching, and then some track and field people I was involved with. And I saw him talking to somebody across the track, and he came over and he said, that was Peter Davis, who's the head of sports science at the Olympic Committee. They're interested in me coming back here to be the head of physiology. And I thought, well, I went there for you. You went there for me. I better come here. So we ended back at the Olympic training site in San Diego. And from there, the Olympic training site was going through a lot of turmoil at that time, as it does every 4 years after the Olympics. And we decided that, hey, and they had let 54 people go. Dr. Stone and I still had our jobs there, but we thought, how long is this going to go on for? So Dr. Stone started to look for positions in sports science where he could build a program. And I thought, I want to get back into coaches' education and a little bit of coaching. And ETSU offered us the opportunity. So when we came here, I was the assistant track coach. Dr. Stone talked to a couple of people here about building a sports science program. And 2005, we came here. Dr. Stone started to build this program. A couple of years into it, I was offered the position of the director of the Centre of Excellence, and off we went. And we've been here now, it'll be 20 years next year. And I think I can honestly say that we've been pretty successful when you look at the people that we've put out into the field. And really, since 2005, sports science, true sports science, not an exercise science program that calls itself sports science, but true sports science has really flourished in the US since that point.
Yeah.
Since we came back. And I think it has a lot to do with the Bill Kramers of this world and the Dr. Stones of this world. Particularly Dr. Stone, because he's been on the coalface of coaching all his career. He coached weightlifters. He started the weightlifting program here. Weightlifters have just come back from nationals, having been very, very successful. I just got a little Facebook comment from Leo Totten yesterday saying, congratulations, ETSU doing really well at nationals. So we're starting to build a name, and it's taken quite a bit of time to do that, because I don't think we had the right people in the right seats on the right bus, if you want to call it that, for a long time. But we do now. We've built that program.
Yeah.
So that was my timeline.
And obviously, when you talk about the program and how successful it's been, and for the podcast itself, we've had so many alumni on. I don't even know if I could remember everyone. Aaron Cunanan, Dylan Suarez, John Abbott, Guy Hornsby. Actually had Dr. Stone on and Dr. Kyle Pierce, and more people than I can remember who have been hugely impactful.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing that, what does the future look like for you and the program and Dr. Stone? What does the program want to do, over the next 5 years?
I think we just want to keep going the way we've been going, just really be successful. One of the things that I think I take a great deal of pleasure in seeing is people going out and trying to build a program similar to what we've got here and spread the word about good coaching. Because I think in the past what's happened is, and I remember presenting this when I did the keynote talk at the NSCA a couple of years ago, the list of stupid stuff that people have done in the past that has caused injury, death, whatever, in coaching. To see that diminish is hugely, hugely impactful to me. To have somebody go out into the field, get their certification, and then do stupid stuff. Getting rid of that element of coaching and having people go out into and coach in good, sensible programs that aren't pulled out of your back pocket or off the internet is. I think we've got to the point where I think we're being impactful on good coaching, and we're not seeing so much of that, what I call stupid stuff. Don't do stupid stuff. We're seeing less and less of it, and I think that's to continue that and to grow it is important. I think the other thing that we're considering at the moment, and I think it's good to mention this, is that the NSCA are looking at certifying sports science programs by I believe they're looking by 2030. They want any strength coach coming out of the program to be certified and to make sure that the education that they get as a strength and conditioning coach is what it should be. And we're looking at certification, and that process alone is going to take 3 to 4 years. It's quite an extensive, but I think having been what I consider, people can argue with this if they want, but I consider our program to be probably the premier leader in that, the first that was really established with what we call a pracademic approach, practical with your academics combined. And I think we should be certified, and it's now time for us to do that. So in the next 3-4 years, we'll be looking at certification. Getting the whole program certified.
And I don't generally have any segments. I know some podcasts will do segments where they'll have quick fires or different questions. But I think to kind of round out the episode with your vast experience on the coaching side and the kind of like education side, I'd love for you to give our listeners, coaches and athletes and future coaches and researchers, people in the academic space as well, advice from your extensive time doing everything that you've done, from competing as an athlete to coaching coaches. What's the advice you would give to people who are newer to the space or up and comers and trying to figure out what their role is in strength and conditioning and sport coaching?
I think the first thing I would say is education. Get your education and be very selective in where you go to get that education, because I think right now there are several programs out there that I would suggest that they at the minimum get their masters in strength and conditioning or sports science, whichever area you want to go into. They're both so intricate and connected. that, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between the strength and conditioning and the sports science. But to me, sports science is the whole unit, from sports psychology, medicine, nutrition, the whole thing put together in a really logical sense and training program. Learn how to do that and how to do it properly. Here we teach traditional periodization versus block periodization, because block periodization is more adaptable to your team sports. Traditional periodization is very adaptable to your individual sport, like track and field. So learn those things, educate yourself. Don't ever pull anything off the internet until you know who you're talking to and what they're all about. So education, definitely. And then when you start to really feel like, I'm starting out on this road to educate myself, be a people person. Interact with people, care about people, develop people. Because it's all very well you being the, if you will, fountain of knowledge, if you can't get it across to people. You're going to be able to, and this is something that I learned from throwing way back, and I think it's very important. Negativity. Get rid of the negativity and care about developing people. And Dr. Stone often says this, and I think it's absolutely true. Somebody screws up at your work, or somebody screws up that you're coaching. Don't castigate them. The chances, discuss it with them. Get to point out the issues that were involved with it. Have a good discussion about it. Don't get rid of them. Don't fire them, because the chances of that person screwing up again are probably next to nil. So develop them in a fashion that you care about their development as a person. And I think if you can combine those two, of caring about people and educate yourself, you're giving yourself a good step up on the ladder.
That was great. That was phenomenal. And I know, you've had such a vast amount of time and experience in sport and athletics. And for people who are interested in understanding more about it, or learning more about what the program has to offer, or anything that you all do to enhance the sports science done in the U.S. and honestly across the globe, where can they go to find that? So where are the websites, links, channels that people can go to?
Yeah, our website is www.sportscienceed.org. It used to be .com. It's now changed to .org. And Morgan Pope, who is my right-hand lady in the centre, is developing that website presently, and it should be complete, up and running in the next few weeks. But if they're interested in our programme, they want to know, masters, what do we need to do class-wise? What's the centre involved in? It should all be on that website. And there's lots of places out there that you can go to investigate strength and conditioning. What I would say is, make sure that if you're interested, and this is what I do when I'm looking for something, look at who you are investigating, look at their resume, look at where they came from, look at what their background is before you jump into really deciding that you're going to use their information.
No, that's great. That's phenomenal advice. Especially even better given that with the internet and the ease of communication and putting out information, everybody can seemingly do it. So being able to parse through it is a very important skill.
There's a lot of internet gurus out there, and you really just got to be very, very selective. And of course, that comes down to your education again.
Exactly.
But thank you so much for allowing the time for me to maybe pontificate about my experiences and backgrounds. I think getting podcasts like this out into the general public about strength and conditioning and sports science full stop is immensely impactful.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on. And for anyone who's interested in following me, you can search philosophical weightlifting, and pretty much anywhere that takes you is the right place. On Instagram, it's Josh_Phil WL. That's PHILWL. Thanks for everyone. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. If you'd like to leave a review, feel free to do that. But that's it for this episode, and we will catch you all next week on another episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast.